rancher gave a ride to an Apache widow. By law, he became the man she must marry. The sun was low in the sky, painting the desert with a golden-orange glow. Dust swirled along the long, empty road that stretched between the hills, and the quiet was broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling high above. Samuel Hayes, a rancher who had spent most of his life tending to his land, was driving his old pickup along this lonely stretch. The truck's engine rumbled steadily, the tires crunching over the gravel, and Samuel's eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of trouble with the fences or stray cattle. He had been on the road since early morning, checking on the far corners of his property, a routine that had become almost sacred to him. His father had taught him to respect the land, to listen to it, and to work it with patience. Samuel liked the silence of the desert. It was a quiet companion, offering both peace and a challenge. But today, as the sun dipped lower, something unusual caught his eye. Far ahead, a figure moved slowly along the side of the road. At first, Samuel thought it might be another rancher or a traveler, but as he drew closer, he saw it was a woman, walking alone in the heat of the late afternoon. Her steps were measured and careful, as if each one carried the weight of some unseen burden. She wore a long shawl that fluttered slightly in the warm breeze, and her dark hair was partially hidden beneath it. Something in the way she carried herself told Samuel that she was not a person who belonged in the open desert by choice. Instinctively, Samuel slowed his truck. He had driven past many people in his life, but there was something about this woman that made him stop. As he rolled down the window, he called out, "Ma'am, do you need a ride?" The woman paused, her eyes lifting to meet his. There was a moment of hesitation. Samuel could see the sorrow etched into her face, a quiet sadness that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. Finally, she nodded slightly. "Do, co. "Yes, thank you," she said in a soft, calm voice. "I need to get to the village, but I have no other way." Samuel stepped out of the truck and opened the passenger door. "Climb in. I'll take you as far as I can." She moved carefully, her movements graceful despite the obvious fatigue in her body. As she settled into the seat, Samuel noticed her hands, delicate but strong. The hands of someone who had worked the land or endured hardship. He felt a small pang of curiosity. Who was she? Why was she walking alone in the middle of the desert? The truck rumbled back to life, and Samuel guided it along the dusty road. The silence returned, broken only by the engine and the wind. The woman, whose name he would later learn was Michaela, looked out the window at the passing landscape, her expression unreadable. Samuel tried to make small conversation, hoping to ease the tension. "It's a long walk to the village. How did you end up out here?" Michaela's eyes flicked toward him briefly, then returned to the horizon. "I have no family nearby," she said quietly. "I had to leave my home. I have no one to help me." Her voice was calm, but there was a softness to it, a hint of vulnerability that Samuel could not ignore. He glanced at her, realizing that she was not only alone in body, but perhaps in spirit as well. The road stretched on, winding between low hills and patches of desert brush. Samuel noticed how the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and red, casting long shadows across the land. He had seen this landscape 1,000 times, yet today it seemed different, almost alive with the story of the woman beside him. Michaela remained quiet, but her presence was compelling. There was something about her that demanded attention, though she did not ask for it. After a while, Samuel spoke again. "You must be tired from walking all this way. The sun's been strong." He kept his eyes on the road, but he could feel her looking at him from the corner of his vision. "Where exactly do you need to go?" "The village near the river," Michaela replied. Her voice was steady, but Samuel noticed the faint tremor of fatigue. "It is the only place I can find help. I have nowhere else to go." Samuel nodded. He had driven this route countless times, and he knew the village she spoke of. "I can take you there. It will be easier than walking, and safer, too. The desert can be unforgiving." He gave her a small, reassuring smile. Michaela offered a faint nod in return, her eyes still fixed on the passing landscape. As the truck moved forward, Samuel found himself glancing at her more than once. There was a quiet dignity about her, a strength beneath the sadness. He could not imagine the events that had brought her here, alone and walking under the scorching sun. The desert was beautiful, but it was also merciless, and she had survived it on foot. That thought impressed him more than he expected. For the next hour, they drove in silence, the kind of silence that is heavy with thought. Samuel thought about his own life, the ranch, the solitude, the routine. He was a man used to working with his hands, talking to the animals, listening to the wind, and tending to his land. People did not often come into his life unexpectedly, especially not strangers. And yet, here was Michaela, a woman who had appeared on a lonely road and instantly captured his attention. Finally, the village came into view. The small cluster of adobe buildings sat quietly beside the river, smoke curling from chimneys and children playing near the water's edge. Samuel slowed the truck and guided it toward the main path. Michaela turned her face toward the village, her eyes scanning the familiar sights, and for the first time a small smile touched her lips. It was fleeting, but Samuel noticed it, and it made him feel unexpectedly hopeful. As they approached the edge of the village, Samuel felt a sudden sense of responsibility. He had offered her a ride, but he had no idea what awaited either of them there. He parked the truck near the village square and waited for Michaela to step out. She turned to him, her gaze calm but serious. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "I know it is not your duty, and yet you did it." Samuel shrugged, trying to appear casual. "I couldn't leave you walking alone out there. It's dangerous, and no one should have to face that on their own." He felt a strange mix of curiosity and concern. There was something about her presence that lingered in his mind, a quiet pull that he could not explain. Michaela nodded once and stepped out of the truck. She moved with care, her eyes scanning the village as if remembering every detail. Samuel watched her, noticing the way she carried herself, the quiet strength in her movements, and the grace in her gestures. He realized that this chance encounter had brought someone remarkable into his life, someone whose story he did not yet know, but felt compelled to understand. As Michaela walked toward the village elders, Samuel remained in the truck, feeling the desert wind on his face and the fading warmth of the sun on his skin. He could not have known then that this simple act of kindness, offering a ride to a stranger, would change both their lives forever. The road had brought them together, and now, at the edge of the village, a new chapter was about to begin, one that neither of them could have predicted. Samuel watched quietly as Michaela approached a small group of people gathered near the center of the village. Their faces were calm but serious, and they watched her with an intensity that made Samuel pause. He didn't understand their language completely, but he could sense from their gestures and expressions that something important was about to happen. Michaela spoke softly, and the elders nodded in response, their eyes shifting toward Samuel and then back to her. Curious and slightly uneasy, Samuel stepped out of the truck and approached the group. "Is everything all right?" he asked politely. The elders turned toward him, and for a moment there was silence. One of the older men stepped forward, his face lined with years of experience and wisdom. He spoke slowly, his words deliberate. Samuel listened carefully, trying to understand the meaning. After a moment, Michaela turned to him and spoke. "This is a law of my people," she said quietly. "By tradition, by custom, by what is written in our ways. When a man offers a widow help on the road, especially when she is alone and in need, he becomes her protector. And not just a protector, he becomes the man she must marry." Samuel froze. The words felt heavy in his ears. He had always considered himself a man of principle, someone who respected laws and rules, but he had never encountered a law like this. He had helped her out of kindness, not expecting anything in return, and yet now, according to her tradition, a bond had been formed that he could not ignore. I don't understand," he said slowly. "You're saying that because I gave you a ride, I am now supposed to marry you?" His voice was calm, but his mind raced. He had never planned to marry anyone again. After his wife had passed years ago, he had focused on the ranch, his work, and the quiet of the desert. Marriage had seemed like a distant idea, something that belonged to stories, not his reality. Michaela's eyes were steady, calm, and yet there was a hint of sadness. "It is not just about me," she said gently. "It is about respect, protection, and the law of our people. This is what has kept our community safe for generations. A widow is vulnerable, and the law ensures she is not left alone. By accepting your help, I have no choice, and neither do you. It is the way of my people." Samuel looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes. She was not threatening him, nor was she demanding anything unfairly. She was simply explaining the law, and the weight of it settled on him like a heavy stone. He glanced around at the elders, who were watching with expressions that mixed patience and expectation. There was no room for argument. This was not a law of the land, he knew, but it was a law nonetheless, one he had to respect if he wished to honor the people before him. For several long moments, Samuel said nothing. He could feel the desert wind against his skin, hear the faint sound of the river flowing nearby, and sense the watchful eyes of the villagers on him. He had helped a stranger, acted out of kindness, and now he found himself caught in a situation he had never imagined. Yet there was also a strange clarity in it. This was real. This was life. And there was no turning back. Finally, he spoke. "I have never been in a situation like this," he admitted. "I didn't know about this law. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything. But if this is your law, then I will not disrespect it. I will do what is expected of me." Michaela nodded slowly, relief passing over her features. "Thank you," she said softly. "It is not easy to accept. I know. Many men would walk away, but you stayed. And that shows honor. That shows understanding." The elders murmured among themselves, pleased with Samuel's response. One of the women, an elder who had been quiet until now, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Michaela's shoulder. "She will be safe with you," she said. "You will protect her, and she will be your partner in all ways. It is not only law, but also trust. Trust that you will care for her as you would your own family." Samuel felt a strange mixture of apprehension and responsibility. He had lived alone for many years, relying on no one but himself. Now, he was being asked to share his life with someone he barely knew. It was daunting, but there was also a sense of purpose in it. He realized that helping her had brought him into a community he had never truly known, and that perhaps this was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to experience life in a way he had not imagined. Michaela turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. "You do not need to rush," she said. "The law is clear, but it is also patient. We have time. You will see who I am, and I will see who you are. But the bond is real. We must respect it, even as we learn to understand each other." Samuel nodded. The words offered some comfort. It was one thing to know that he was expected to marry her, but it was another to realize that the process of understanding could unfold naturally. He would not be forced into anything against his will, and she too was bound by the same tradition to share her life with him openly and honestly. The sun had nearly set now, and the village glowed in the soft light of evening. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the air was filled with the faint aroma of cooking fires. Children laughed in the distance, and the sound of the river added a gentle melody to the scene. Samuel felt a sudden awareness of the world around him, of life continuing even as he stepped into a future full of uncertainty. He asked Michaela if she would like to walk with him to the small house where she could rest. She accepted, and together they walked along the narrow paths of the village. Samuel noticed the careful way she moved, the way she observed every detail, the way the villagers smiled at her, nodded respectfully, and allowed her space. It was clear that she was known and respected, even in her grief. As they approached the house, Samuel realized that this encounter had changed something inside him. He had been a man of routine, quiet and solitary, but now he faced a life intertwined with another's. He could not predict what lay ahead, but he could choose to meet it with integrity, respect, and kindness. The law of her people had given him a responsibility, but it had also given him a chance to understand another way of life, a chance to see the world through different eyes, and perhaps a chance to discover something he had long thought lost. Michaela entered the small house, glancing back at Samuel. "Thank you again," she said. "I know this is unexpected for both of us, but you have shown respect, and that matters more than words." Samuel nodded, watching her settle in. He felt a quiet determination growing inside him. He would honor the law, honor her, and face whatever came next with an open heart. The desert stretched endlessly outside, calm and silent, and for the first time in years, Samuel felt that his life had taken a turn, one that was uncertain, challenging, but full of possibilities. As night fell over the village, Samuel walked back to his truck, looking up at the stars beginning to sparkle above. He realized that a simple act of kindness, giving a stranger a ride, had become the beginning of something much greater. The law of her people had created a connection he could not have imagined, and now he would have to navigate it with care, respect, and courage. It was the start of a journey neither of them had chosen, yet one that could shape both of their lives forever. Samuel left the village just as the first hints of dawn colored the sky with soft pinks and golds. The quiet road stretched endlessly before him, the familiar dust and gravel crunching beneath his truck's tires. As he drove back toward his ranch, his mind was a whirl of thoughts. The events of the previous evening felt almost surreal. A simple act of kindness, giving a woman a ride, had become a matter of law and custom he barely understood. The reality of it weighed heavily on him. For much of the ride, Samuel remained silent, staring out at the open desert. He had spent countless years alone, tending to his land, speaking mostly to his animals, and finding comfort in routine. But now that routine felt fragile, like a familiar path suddenly blocked by the unexpected. The thought of having a stranger, Michaela, the woman whose face lingered in his mind, become a permanent part of his life both unsettled and intrigued him. When Samuel finally reached his ranch, the sun had risen fully, casting long shadows over the fields and fences. The land was quiet save for the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. He parked his truck near the barn and stepped out, stretching his legs. The crisp, morning air smelled of earth and grass, a scent that had always grounded him. Yet even here, surrounded by what he knew best, he could not shake the weight of responsibility that had followed him from the village. Samuel began his morning routine, checking the fences, inspecting the livestock, and moving through the familiar rhythm of ranch life. But his mind was elsewhere. Every task felt mechanical, a way to delay thinking about the truth. Michaela's presence was now a permanent obligation. According to the law of her people, he could not ignore it. He had to accept it, face it, and find a way to live with it. The realization made him both uneasy and determined. As the day wore on, Samuel reflected on what this would mean. He had always lived independently, making decisions alone, solving problems without consulting anyone, and carrying the weight of responsibility solely on his own shoulders. Now, he would have to share his life with someone he barely knew. It was a challenge unlike any he had faced before, and yet there was also something compelling about it. He had glimpsed her strength, her calmness, and the dignity with which she carried herself. Perhaps, he thought, there was more to this connection than duty alone. Later that afternoon, Samuel heard a sound he had not expected: footsteps approaching the ranch. He turned and saw Michaela walking along the dusty path leading to his home. She carried a small bundle, her expression steady, as though she had decided to accept this new life on her own terms. Samuel felt a mixture of surprise and relief. She had not waited for him to summon her. She had taken the initiative to come into his world. "Good morning," Samuel said, trying to sound casual. "You didn't have to come all this way." Michaela smiled faintly. "I wanted to," she said simply. "You helped me when I had nowhere else to go. Now, I will help you. I will learn, and I will contribute." Samuel studied her, noticing the quiet determination in her eyes. He realized that she was not just a passive participant in this unusual arrangement. She was choosing to engage, to make a life with him on her terms, as well as his. That thought eased some of the tension in his chest. Perhaps this would not be as difficult as he had feared. Over the next several days, Michaela began helping around the ranch. At first, Samuel assigned her small tasks: feeding the chickens, carrying water, and gathering firewood. She handled each task with care and attention, showing a natural ability to adapt to the ranch life. Samuel found himself impressed by her skill and patience. She worked quietly but efficiently, never complaining, always observing and learning. As they worked side by side, a subtle connection began to form. Samuel started to notice details he had not paid attention to before: the gentle way she spoke to the animals, the way she moved with grace even when carrying heavy loads, and the small smiles she offered when a task was done successfully. He realized that she was not only adapting but also bringing a new energy to the ranch, one that felt both comforting and invigorating. Despite this growing familiarity, Samuel still wrestled with doubts. He had never shared his life with anyone in this way. The law had created an obligation, yes, but could he truly see himself married to someone he had only just met? Could he trust himself to respect her fully, to protect her, and to honor the bond that had been placed upon them? These questions lingered, unanswered, as he went about his work. Michaela, for her part, remained patient. She did not press him for conversation or companionship, instead letting him adjust to the reality of their situation. She shared stories of her people when he asked, teaching him about their customs, their respect for the land, and their deep connection to family and community. Samuel listened intently, fascinated by the knowledge she carried and the gentle way she shared it. In her presence, he felt a new kind of respect for tradition, one that went beyond rules and obligations to touch the heart of human connection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Samuel and Michaela sat on a small porch overlooking the ranch. The sky was a swirl of colors: deep purples, reds, and oranges, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of nature. Samuel broke the silence. "I have to admit," he said, "this is all new to me. I've lived alone for so long that I'm not sure well, how to share my life with someone." Michaela looked at him, her eyes calm and understanding. "It is not easy," she said, "but you are learning. You are trying. That is what matters. We do not need to rush. We only need to respect each other and the life we are beginning together." Samuel nodded slowly, feeling a sense of relief. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. He realized that he did not need to have all the answers immediately. The bond that had been formed by law could grow naturally into something deeper, built on understanding, trust, and shared experience. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel and Michaela settled into a rhythm. They worked together, shared meals, and occasionally sat in companionable silence, watching the land stretch out before them. Samuel found that he was beginning to enjoy her company, not just out of duty, but because he genuinely liked being around her. Michaela's presence brought a sense of calm and order to the ranch, a quiet balance that Samuel had not realized he needed. Yet, challenges remained. Samuel had to adjust to sharing his decisions and responsibilities, to considering someone else's perspective, and to opening himself up emotionally. There were moments of frustration and doubt, as was natural in any new partnership, but there were also moments of laughter, quiet satisfaction, and mutual respect. Slowly, the uneasy tension created by the law began to give way to understanding and connection. One afternoon, while checking the fences together, Samuel noticed a small smile on Michaela's face as she watched the sunset. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. For the first time, Samuel felt a spark of something beyond obligation, perhaps the beginning of friendship, trust, and even affection. He realized that this bond, though created by law, was becoming something far more meaningful. By the time the desert sun sank completely below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, Samuel felt a quiet sense of acceptance. He could not ignore the law, nor could he ignore the responsibilities that had come with it, but he could embrace the opportunity to build a life with someone he had come to respect deeply. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges, but it also held the promise of connection, growth, and perhaps even happiness. As night fell over the ranch, Samuel returned to the house, reflecting on the days that had passed. He realized that helping a stranger had changed everything. What had begun as an obligation imposed by law was slowly transforming into something richer: understanding, companionship, and the first tentative steps toward trust and care. The desert outside remained vast and quiet, but inside, life was beginning to take on new meaning. Samuel knew that the journey would not be easy, but he also knew that he would face it with integrity, patience, and an open heart. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel began noticing subtle changes, not only in the rhythm of the ranch, but in himself. Life with Michaela was no longer defined solely by the law that had brought her into his life. Her presence had begun to shape the way he thought, worked, and even felt. At first, he had measured every interaction, cautious not to overstep, uncertain how to honor both the law and his own life. Now he found himself looking forward to her company, curious about her thoughts, and attentive to the way she moved through the world. Michaela, too, had started to settle into the life of the ranch. She moved through the fields with quiet confidence, tending the animals with gentle hands and an intuitive understanding of the land. Samuel watched her often, fascinated by the way she could read the subtle signs of weather, animal behavior, and soil health. Each morning she greeted the chores not as a burden but as an opportunity to contribute, to learn, and to share. Her calm energy seemed to ripple through the ranch, bringing a sense of balance that Samuel had not realized he had been missing. One morning, as the sun rose over the distant hills, Samuel found Michaela sitting on a fallen log near the corral. She was sketching the outlines of the cattle pens in a small notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. He approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her. "What are you doing?" he asked gently. Michaela looked up and smiled faintly. "I'm trying to understand the land, the way the animals move, and how everything fits together," she explained. "Your ranch has its own patterns, its own rhythm. I want to learn them, so I can help you more effectively." Samuel nodded, impressed by her dedication. "You've learned a lot already," he said. "I've worked this land my whole life, but sometimes I miss things that someone with a fresh perspective can see." She laughed softly, a sound that blended with the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. "Then we can learn from each other," she said. "We don't have to know everything immediately. We only need to pay attention and be willing to understand." The simplicity of her words struck Samuel. He realized that this bond, once forced by law, was beginning to grow into something built on mutual respect and understanding. They worked side by side that day, repairing fences, carrying water, and moving feed. Every so often their hands brushed, a subtle reminder that the law had created an obligation, but their actions and choices could create something far more meaningful. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the desert stretch out before them. Sometimes they spoke of small things, weather patterns, livestock habits, or the challenges of the land. Other times they sat in silence, comfortable with each other's presence. Samuel found that he could relax in ways he hadn't allowed himself for years. Michaela's calmness had a grounding effect on him, a quiet reassurance that life could be shared without fear or haste. One afternoon, Samuel noticed Michaela tending to a wounded calf. The animal had a shallow cut on its leg, and Samuel had been planning to take it to the veterinarian later. Michaela knelt beside the calf, speaking softly, and cleaned the wound with practiced hands. Samuel watched her, admiration growing. "You have a natural touch," he said. "I thought I would have to handle this alone." Michaela looked up, her eyes meeting his. "I've seen many ways to care for animals," she said simply. "It is part of understanding the land and its creatures. We are responsible for them, just as we are responsible for each other." Her words lingered with him long after the calf was patched up and resting. The notion of responsibility extended beyond chores and duties. It included care, attention, and respect. He began to see Michaela not as a stranger or a legal obligation, but as a partner, someone whose perspective enriched his own and whose presence challenged him to be more thoughtful, more patient, and more aware. Evenings were often the quietest moments of all. Sometimes the two of them would walk along the perimeter of the ranch, listening to the wind whisper through the trees and the soft clatter of the animals settling in their pens. Samuel found himself opening up in these moments, sharing stories of his past, of his childhood on the ranch, and of the dreams he had once held. Michaela listened attentively, occasionally sharing her own stories, tales of her family, her childhood among her people, and the lessons she had learned from both hardship and joy. Through these shared moments, a bond began to form that was deeper than obligation or law. Samuel realized that understanding someone took time, patience, and a willingness to listen. He had always respected the land, but now he was learning to respect the person beside him in a new way. Michaela's presence challenged him to see the world through a broader lens, one that included tradition, culture, and human connection. One evening, as a warm breeze swept across the ranch, Samuel found Michaela sitting quietly by the small river that ran through his property. She was gazing at the water, lost in thought. Samuel sat beside her, careful not to disturb the peace. "You've taught me a lot," he said after a moment. "About the land, the animals, and, well, about people too." Michaela turned her gaze toward him, her expression gentle. "And you've taught me something as well," she said. "You've shown me patience, kindness, and the value of understanding someone on their own terms. This bond we share, it is stronger than law alone. We are learning from each other." Samuel felt a warmth in his chest. The bond, once a formal obligation, had begun to transform into something mutual, something alive. He understood now that the law had created a beginning, but the choices they made, the care they showed, and the respect they held for each other would determine what came next. As the days passed, their routine grew smoother. They shared meals, worked together, and occasionally laughed at small mistakes or unexpected surprises. The ranch became more than a place of work. It became a shared home, a space where two people could learn to live together, support each other, and begin to understand the depth of connection that life could offer. Samuel also began to reflect on the broader meaning of the law that had brought them together. It was not merely a rule or a formality, it was a mechanism for protection, trust, and community. By ensuring that Michaela had someone to rely on, the law had given both of them a chance to grow, to learn, and to explore the possibilities of a shared life. Samuel found that he could respect this law while also finding his own way to live it authentically. One morning, while repairing a section of fencing that had been damaged by a recent storm, Samuel looked over at Michaela and felt a surprising sense of gratitude. She had chosen to embrace this new life, to contribute fully, and to meet him with respect and understanding. He realized that the initial weight of obligation had shifted into something far more meaningful: trust, mutual effort, and the beginnings of partnership. As the sun set that evening, Samuel and Michaela stood side by side, looking out over the land they had worked together to tend. The sky was painted with soft colors, and the desert seemed calm yet alive. Samuel felt a quiet sense of peace. He had faced uncertainty, embraced responsibility, and discovered that the law that had seemed daunting at first could lead to growth, understanding, and even hope. Why? For the first time, Samuel began to imagine a future that included another person, not as a burden or duty, but as a companion, a teacher, and a partner. The journey was far from complete, and challenges would undoubtedly arise, but the foundation was forming. Through respect, patience, and shared experience, Samuel and Michaela were creating a bond that could grow into something enduring, meaningful, and even joyful. And so, as the night settled over the ranch, Samuel felt a sense of quiet optimism. The law had brought them together, but it was their choices, their willingness to understand, and their care for one another that would shape the life ahead. He had learned that connection was not forced. It was nurtured, cultivated, and embraced. And in the stillness of the desert night, with Michaela nearby, he felt that something important had begun. The beginning of a true partnership, built on respect, understanding, and the promise of what life could bring. The weeks passed quietly yet steadily as Samuel and Michaela continued to share the rhythm of the ranch. By now, their partnership had settled into a natural pattern. Michaela knew the chores, the land, and the animals as well as Samuel did, sometimes noticing details he had missed. Samuel, in turn, had begun to understand her perspective, learning the traditions and stories that shaped her life. The law that had once felt like a heavy weight had softened into something richer, a shared understanding, respect, and mutual care. One bright morning, Samuel watched Michaela tending the garden near the small creek that ran through his land. The plants had flourished under her careful attention, their green leaves standing in contrast to the dusty brown desert. Samuel admired the way she worked, noting her focus, patience, and gentleness. He realized he no longer viewed her as someone placed in his life by obligation. She was part of it now, a partner in every sense of the word. Michaela looked up and smiled when she saw him. "The garden is doing well," she said, her voice calm and warm. "It will provide food for us and for the animals. It feels good to see life grow." Samuel returned the smile, feeling a warmth in his chest. "It does," he said, "and it feels even better knowing you are here to help." He realized almost with surprise that he meant more than just the words themselves. Her presence had become a comfort, a source of support, and a reason to look forward to each day. The ranch had also changed subtly under their care. Samuel had always valued efficiency and practicality, but Michaela brought a sense of harmony and balance. She had a way of noticing the small things, the way the wind shifted, the patterns of the birds, or the way the cattle moved through the fields. Samuel had always relied on instinct, but now he saw the wisdom in her careful observations. Together they worked in tandem, complementing each other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. One afternoon, Samuel and Michaela were fixing a section of fencing damaged by a recent storm. As they worked, Samuel paused and looked at her. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. "Not just the ranch, but me too." Michaela glanced at him, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "We've changed together," she replied. "I've learned from you and you've learned from me. That is what makes a partnership strong. It is not only about law or duty. It is about understanding and supporting each other." Samuel felt a deep sense of gratitude. He remembered the moment he had first given her a ride along the desert road, not realizing how that simple act would transform both of their lives. What had begun as an obligation imposed by tradition had become a genuine bond built on trust, shared experience, and growing affection. As evening fell, the two of them sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange, pink, and purple. The desert stretched endlessly, calm and quiet, but Samuel felt a new kind of stillness inside him. He realized that he was no longer afraid of the unknown. He had learned that life could be shared, that connection could be cultivated, and that trust could grow between two people who respected each other. "Michaela," he said softly, "I've been thinking. The law brought us together, yes. But I want us to make our own decisions, to build our life intentionally. I don't want this to be just about tradition anymore." Michaela turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said. "We have learned from each other, cared for each other, and shared our lives. It is time to embrace that fully, not as obligation, but as choice." That night, they spoke long into the darkness, sharing hopes, dreams, and quiet fears. They laughed at small memories from their time on the ranch, discussed ideas for improvements, and shared stories of their past. Samuel found that he was opening his heart in ways he hadn't in years, and Michaela shared her own feelings with a calm honesty that touched him deeply. For the first time, he felt the possibility of a life shared with someone not as a duty, but as a true partnership. In the weeks that followed, Samuel and Michaela began preparing for a celebration that would honor both the law and their personal choice. The village elders who had first explained the tradition visited the ranch to help guide them. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. It was not just a marriage, it was a recognition of their partnership, a bridge between two worlds, and a promise to face life together with respect, understanding, and care. On the day of the ceremony, the sun rose bright and warm over the desert. The ranch looked alive with activity. Samuel felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation as he adjusted his coat and hat, waiting for Michaela to arrive. When she stepped forward, he was struck by her quiet grace. Her dress was simple yet elegant, and her eyes met his with steady calmness. There was no fear, only a shared understanding that this was the start of something new and important. The elders led the ceremony, speaking of tradition, duty, and the responsibilities that came with partnership. Samuel and Michaela listened carefully, their hands joined. But beyond the law, beyond the words, They felt the deeper meaning of the moment. This was their choice, their commitment, and their acknowledgement of what they had built together over weeks of shared work, patience, and understanding. As the ceremony concluded, the elders smiled, offering blessings and advice. Samuel and Michaela turned to each other, eyes reflecting gratitude and hope. The law had brought them together, yes, but it was their actions, trust, and care that had made the bond real. They had chosen to honor each other, to respect one another, and to build a life together beyond obligation. After the ceremony, the villagers stayed to celebrate. There was laughter, shared food, and music. Samuel and Michaela moved through the crowd, greeted with warmth and respect. Children ran past, curious and playful, and the elders shared stories of family, land, and community. The ranch had become more than a home. It had become a place of connection, learning, and shared life. That night, as the celebration quieted and the stars glittered over the desert, Samuel and Michaela stood together on the porch. The air was cool, carrying the soft scent of desert flowers and the faint sound of animals settling for the night. Samuel felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness had led them to this moment, a union not only of law and tradition, but also of choice, respect, and love. "Michaela," Samuel said, turning to her, "I didn't know what to expect when I gave you that ride, but now I can't imagine life without you." She smiled, reaching for his hand. "And I didn't know what the future would hold when I accepted your help, but now I feel at home, not just on this land, but with you." They stood together in the quiet desert night, two lives intertwined. Samuel realized that the law had created a beginning, but it was their care, understanding, and choices that had created something lasting. The ranch, the land, and the animals had been witnesses to their journey, but it was the bond between them that truly mattered. In the days that followed, Samuel and Michaela continued their work on the ranch, now fully as partners. Each day was filled with tasks, challenges, and moments of joy. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet reflections, learning more about each other with every passing day. Samuel found that he could face hardships with greater patience, knowing that he was not alone. Michaela found strength and comfort in his steady presence, knowing that they could face life together. Over time, the ranch thrived like never before. Fields were greener, animals were healthier, and the small garden flourished under Michaela's care. Samuel realized that this success was more than physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and communal. They had learned to work together, to respect each other, and to build a life that honored both tradition and personal choice. And so, in the quiet of the desert, under the endless sky, Samuel and Michaela's partnership became a testament to what could grow when respect, understanding, and care guided every step. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, giving a ride to a widow, had transformed into a lifetime of companionship, trust, and love. The law had created the opportunity, but it was their hearts and choices that had created a home, a shared life, and a future filled with promise.